Oh, got it. There we go. Should I start?
Yeah.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Dave Summers with Invita, and this is my first meeting as the new chair of the MCC. Thank you to Laura, Melissa, and PPACG for their support as I take on this role, and I look forward to working with all of you. We've got the agenda that went out early, and so hopefully everyone's had a chance to review it. We'll start by with our approval of the agenda, and that will be our first motion is to approve the agenda and the approval of the minutes. Do you like to put those things together in one vote? Let's do it that way if we can. Do we have approval for the agenda and the minutes?
So Dave, I'm going to coach you along just a little bit. So first
Sure.
you'll ask for someone to move to do that.
Do we have a motion to approve?
And so MCC members, one of you guys needs to say, I move to approve the agenda and the minutes. Usually somebody's pretty good at jumping in.
Sorry, my computer's a little bit slow. This is Kristen Amundsen. I motion to approve the agenda and the minutes.
And then Dave will
And
ask
do we
for
have a second?
Diana Van Auken, Teller Senior Coalition. I second that motion.
Thank you. And all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. There we go. All right. We move on right into public comments. I don't know if we had any comments that came in ahead of this meeting. I see a shake of the head, no. So we're ready to move right into our community guests and provider presentations. And I believe first up, we have the honor of having Andy Gunning give a presentation this morning. So Andy, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Sure. Thank you, Dave. Thank you, members of the MCC. To say it's going to be a presentation is a little bit of a stretch, but
Conversation.
It's more of a conversation around what's going on as far as transportation here within the region and within PPACG. John Leosados is on as well. He's our transportation director. I'm sure you all have met John before. And we didn't have a chance to coordinate remarks beforehand. I think John's going to talk more about our long-range transportation plan and how all the different sub-plans, including our specialized transit plan, fit into the long-range transportation plan, because we're just now getting started with that effort. So there's a lot of stuff going on. So Laura asked me a couple of weeks ago, hey, can you come and brief the MCC on kind of our vision, what's going on, what's relevant that would be of interest for the MCC, and so forth. So I've got some remarks I'll give, but also looking for feedback as well. When I got here, it's been 4 years now, 4 years this month, actually. I realized that you all are doing some really good work around mobility coordination for seniors and residents with disabilities across our region, but also realized, this is back when Joe Urban was here as the AAA director, that there was also probably a lot more that the MCC could get involved with and help us out with in our planning efforts. We got to respect the fact that we've got a couple of different committees that also do transportation planning work and make recommendations for us. The big one is the TAC, the Technical Advisory Committee, which is made up of jurisdictional members from all of our member jurisdictions within the Metropolitan Planning Organization. So clearly, we've got to figure out ways to kind of respect roles and responsibilities and so forth. But I think there's just so much going on in the transportation planning realm these days. I think there's a great opportunity where the MCC, we could have you guys kind of step up and help us out, beyond the important stuff you're doing already. Obviously, we took over the mobility coordination program with the big FTA grant about a year and a half ago now, about a little over a year ago. And we brought Laura on board a year and a half ago. And that was a big decision. We decided, that this would be good for us to take over the FTA 5310 grant and also see that the PPRTA money that flows to the city of Colorado Springs flows back to PPACG, so we can figure out how to responsibly coordinate the funds that go into senior and specialized transportation needs. So that was kind of a big, bold step. And I know the MCC is going to be instrumental in kind of helping us shape what that looks like going forward. And you'll have a lot of involvement in the specialized transit plan update as we start getting into that later this year. But like I said, beyond that, I think there's other opportunities as well. So just going to kind of riff for a few minutes here, may ramble for a little bit. So apologies for that in advance, but yeah, I think about this stuff a lot. It's just a really interesting time to be involved in transportation planning and coordination work. There's just so much stuff that's going on. Some of the stuff predates the pandemic, but other stuff that we've kind of come to learn in going through the pandemic as well. And I'll just go through some of the kind of challenges and opportunities and things that we've been seeing change here in the past couple of years. Yeah, one big one, this started obviously before the pandemic, but mobility as a service has become a really big issue. And actually, maybe more broadly than that, I'll mention that technology changes in transportation have just been phenomenal. We had a workshop a couple of years ago, this was pre-pandemic, on autonomous and electric vehicle technology that is taking shape. And that's really changing kind of the shape of transportation as we know it. Auto manufacturers are all in on electric vehicles. We're seeing a ton of money available out there at the state and federal levels to make sure we can get our electric vehicle charging stuff up and running across our major corridors and down to the neighborhood level and so forth. But there's so much change as far as technology and transportation that's kind of one big opportunity. And within that, as a subset, is mobility as a service. We've seen a huge increase in ride sharing services like Lyft and Uber over the past several years, or the past decade, really, when they really first started getting ramped up, but other opportunities as well that we're seeing here in Colorado Springs, obviously with bike share opportunities and now scooters that are on the street. And I mention this because there used to be a lot of concern about when you invest in transit networks, and especially high capacity transit, that the last mile or the first mile and the last mile were always these big challenges that we had to overcome. And just from my perspective, doing this for about 30 some odd years now, I see that as much less of a challenge now than it's ever been. And I think it's going to be less of a problem going forward too. Just we have so many more options now to make that final connection, that final mile or that first mile, with all these different options that are becoming available. Not that every option is suitable for every person in our region and every demographic, but I think we're going to continue to see a lot of changes in those spaces. But yeah, technology changes have been phenomenal. The pandemic has highlighted some changes as well. And we've learned new skills, how to work remotely, obviously through Zoom and other technologies. And I think that's going to have an impact on the transportation system. Kind of remains to be seen going forward exactly what that's going to look like. But the fact that we've learned how to work from home, and if we can get some of those practices to stick a little bit going forward, that could be a good travel management, travel reduction strategy. If a portion of our workforce could work at home any given day of the week, that could have a real positive impact in reducing peak hour congestion. We've seen a lot of funding opportunities coming down the pike, and we'll probably talk a little bit more about that this morning as well. The state passed Senate Bill 260 last year, which I think they kind of hold out as sort of a landmark state funding bill after many years and decades of neglect on the state transportation system. They finally did pass a bill last year. It would look a lot different if I think if John and I and others in our region had a chance to really write the bill to fit where we thought where the needs were, but at least there's finally some investment in the state system as a result of that bill that was passed last year. And there's federal opportunities as well. I'll circle back to that with the big infrastructure bill that was passed by Congress and signed into law back in November. And then finally, there's climate change issues as well. There's climate impacts that we have to take into consideration within our transportation network. So just there's a lot of these different changes and shifts that we're seeing happen that really kind of do open up, I think, opportunities and also highlight some challenges as well. To take the climate issue just a little bit further, going to dig into this a little more, and John will probably talk about this as well in our transportation plan update. But just so you're aware, the state adopted, and you may know this already, but they adopted a set of guidelines, or actually not guidelines, but requirements that we have to reduce carbon emissions in different sectors. It was part of a House bill that was passed in 2019. It was House Bill 1261. Basically led to a roadmap where we as a state have to reduce greenhouse gas emissions in oil and gas, in manufacturing and utilities, and also in the transportation sector. I think a few of us probably have a little bit of PTSD still from last year working with the state and coming up with our transportation carbon reduction requirements. Finally went to the State Transportation Commission back in December, and that's a kind of going to be a big impact that's going to be felt in our transportation planning process. And I'll let John kind of amplify that a little bit more when he talks about our long range plan update. But now we have to really factor in how we're going to reduce emissions in certain horizon years in our planning exercise, and then also figure out how to offset high capacity projects, highway projects, when we start investing in those in our long range planning. Let me see. Long range plan, I'm going to skip over, let John talk about that. Circling back to the federal infrastructure bill, that's I think another really good opportunity that's in front of us. It's been a while since the feds really pumped a lot of money into infrastructure investment. So the bill that was passed in November addresses things not just in the transportation realm, but other infrastructure needs like broadband technology, a lot of money for electric vehicle charging networks, a lot of money for water and wastewater projects, wildfire mitigation. So really a pretty comprehensive infrastructure bill. It presents a lot of opportunities for us in all regions across the country with the discretionary grant programs that are available out there. So one thing we're trying to do is work with our local jurisdictions to really see, for the competitive grants that'll be available over the next 5 years, where should we really position ourselves and try to get behind some big regional priorities that can really help us move things forward in our communities. I think that's another big opportunity out there. One more thing I'll mention, and I'll probably leave it here, is before I turn it over to John, is one thing that's been kind of top of mind for me is kind of back on the air quality front. I mentioned greenhouse gas emissions. We have to start considering within our planning process. We also have to follow federal regs around a number of federal pollutants that are out there. And one of them is ozone, or ground level ozone. And there's federal standards that have been in place and have been updated a couple of times over the past couple of decades. And one concern that I've got is that we are not currently meeting the 2015 standard for ground level ozone, which is kind of a big deal. Our neighbors to the north up in the Denver region and further up north on the Front Range and Weld and Larimer counties are already in what's called non-attainment with EPA's standards for ozone. And we are almost right there with them. I've got a lot of concerns about this. If we end up getting designated in non-attainment, it becomes a 20-year obligation, if you will, for us to figure out how we're going to bring our emissions back down and start meeting the federal standards if we get designated as non-attainment. So it's got a lot of impact from a regulatory standpoint. I mean, it's impactful more from a public health standpoint. That's really, I think, the number one reason why we ought to be a little more concerned about it and see what we can do to get in a better place where we're still meeting the standards. But ground level ozone, it has a big impact on our senior population, on young children, on people with underlying health conditions, especially lung capacity issues and the like. So this is one issue that's going to be kind of front and center for us here for some time. It's a lengthy process to get designated as non-attainment. So even though right now we're not meeting the standard, it doesn't mean that the feds are going to flip a switch next year and say that we're getting redesignated. But this could happen. I would surmise probably within the next 5 years or so. So I've got some concerns around that. I think there are some things that we could do as a community where if we do invest in some types of transportation where we can reduce our travel and reduce our emissions, that will definitely help us. So just wanted to put that on your radar as well, that's kind of one of the big challenges that we're going to be faced with. Let me pause there and see if you have any questions. Otherwise, I can turn it over to John and he can dig into the long range plan a little bit.
I do have one question, Andy.
Sure.
I'm trying to remember the bill number going before the Colorado legislature, but it was something I read just yesterday, I believe. And Representative Valdez in Denver is one of the ones that has put this forth, and it is a bill at the legislature that will give TNCs access to NMT dollars. And it is to encourage the number of transportation providers in the pool providing NMT legislation. I wondered if you were aware of that piece of legislation. And at some point, I think it would be great as an MCC group for us to discuss what the implications are for our region to have the TNCs in the pool.
Not aware of a specific bill. We had heard that there was going to be something coming at some point. So that's really good to know. If you have a bill number.
I'll get you the bill number. I
That would be
read
super.
the whole thing yesterday. I've got it printed out on my desk. I should have brought it with me. It was just interesting. It's like, okay, it'd be interesting to see, typically first year, things like that, they have to float it and then it takes a while for things like that to really pass. But I think it's something we need to be aware of. It did imply that they would be putting restrictions on the TNCs to make it a more level playing field so that they would have to pass background checks. They would have to pass vehicle inspections. They would have to be a part of the CAP process so that in order to play, they would have to play by the rules. But still, I think that is interesting. I don't know where that's coming from, where the pressure is coming from, but maybe the TNCs want to play. I don't know, but I think it does have implications for any of us in the specialized transportation field.
Okay, that's really good to know. John and I had a lunch meeting with Senator Faith Winter a couple of months back, probably November, December now, when the what is it, the TLRC, the Transportation Legislative Review Committee, was in Colorado Springs. And she indicated that she was going to work on something and it was a high priority of hers. So this may be a product of that. So yeah, I look forward to digging
Sure.
into that and get your guys' perspective to see if that's something that we ought to support, monitor, suggest changes around.
At least monitor and figure out what role we play.
Sure.
Hey, Dave, you have a question in the chat, Dave.
Hold on. It's Jolene has asked, could you define TNC for the group?
Transportation network company.
Mhm.
These are generally your Uber and Lyft.
Yep.
So it is a bill at the state legislature that would invite Uber and Lyft to participate in non-medical transportation and have access to those state funds. And so, but as I said, it puts some restrictions on them that they would have to then follow a higher level of scrutiny and play by the rules that we all play by, which would be good news if they're going to play.
Well, and better news if the state would put some more money into the pot as well. There's so much demand out there and not
Right.
sure how much unmet demand there is, but yeah, this is interesting.
Deanna put the House bill on there. I'll send that out
Super.
to everybody.
Oh, super. There we go. House Bill 221114. Perfect.
And I have been sending out to the group kind of updates on House Bill 260. And then that has already been passed, but also the infrastructure bill. I just want everybody to be aware that we have been working internally as staff to stand up a part of our website, like a link to our website on information about the infrastructure bill and how we kind of have it broken up in terms of transit and roads, transportation, environmental. We have it broken up so that you guys, as we find out information from our network of COGS, as well as just in general through FDA, those types of things, we're trying to stand up a hub of information for people to access about those opportunities. So Jessica just dropped that into the chat, that link. And when we do come across NOFAs and notice of funding availabilities, we're trying to put those on there as well. So it's kind of a one-stop shop for opportunities that are coming through there.
Well, Andy, thank you for sharing what's on your mind and giving us that kind of umbrella view of what's going on at PPACG and how it can impact all of our individual work. Look forward to understanding how we can participate in future discussions. With that, are you turning this over to John?
Yes, John, if you're ready, go for it.
All right. Hi, everybody. So when I was asked to sort of kind of chat about this, I was taking a little more of a higher level approach. So I couldn't help but notice every time Andy said, oh, but John might talk about that later. I wasn't planning on talking about some of those things later, because that gets into more of the individual things. So let me kind of go over the overview that I had sort of planned, I think based on what Laura asked me to chat about. And then we'll be open up for questions, and we can dive into anything that you want to dive into that maybe Andy highlighted that I'm not going to go back and catch. So I think the first thing is, let's go back in. I think I like to do a little bit of history, a little bit of geography, and then gonna go into the process. So the feds started collecting highway tax way back in the 50s, and there was like not a great understanding of how those dollars would sort of go back to the individual states and localities. Localities? I think I just made up a word. If not, localities is now a word. Those local jurisdictions. And so there was a lot of consternation. And so finally they came up with the Federal Aid Highway Act of 1964, basically said, hey, you all need to do some cooperative planning before we start distributing this money. We don't want to see, one highway do this and one roadway do this, and they kind of miss each other, or we don't want to see 6 lanes going to 2 lanes, going to 4 lanes. We want some consistency. We want the overall look and feel of the transportation network to be seamless. We don't want one person to think they're from going one place to another. And that also extends into, transit, right? We don't want a bus stopping a block before where everybody really wants to get off, just because that's where the jurisdictional boundary is. So they said, you need to sort of do this. So that's when a lot of the MPOs around the country sort of started to appear. Metropolitan MPO is short for Metropolitan Planning Organization. It's the process by which the feds sort of redistribute the money back into local areas. Flash forward 1972-ish, there became a more of a well-defined system for the MPOs. 50,000 in population was an MPO. So that's why to this day, anything above 50,000 requires the establishment of a Metropolitan Planning Organization. So you will have some Metropolitan Planning Organizations, or MPOs, be standalone organizations, and some that are embedded within counties, and some that are embedded within Council of Governments, right? So here in Colorado Springs, the Metropolitan Planning Organization sits within the Council of Governments, but it doesn't need to be that way. You could move to another state or another locality and find out that the Council of Governments is completely separate than the MPO. You could find out that the MPO is just a division of the county, right? So it's up to the individual region on how it wants to handle it, but the Metropolitan Planning Organization is within federal legislation. So flash forward to the ICE-T, T21, all these surface transportation acts, they start really putting in a lot of rules and funding for Metropolitan Planning Organizations. And the upshot of all of this is that if you are at 50,000 or more, you must be an MPO, and an MPO is required to do 2 main documents. One is a long-range transportation plan that has to look at least 20 years into the future. and can't have a shelf life more than 5 years in an attainment region or 4 years in a non-attainment region. So that's why we typically will do a long range plan with a 25-year horizon or even a 30-year horizon, because you want to make sure that it has some longevity and you're not constantly doing long range plans. So that's a little bit of that kind of history. Now into geography. MPOs are defined by the census urbanized area. So we are the urbanized area for the Pikes Peak region. So we have sort of the central core of El Paso County, but not all of El Paso County. So like Eastern El Paso County is not part of the MPO. And then we have like a Cactus Arm that goes up 24 and connects into Woodland Park, because that's an urbanized area as well. So the Metropolitan Planning Organization takes care of that urbanized area for the long range plan. If you are outside of that MPO boundary, here in Colorado, you are taking care of what's called as a transportation planning region, or TPR, and you're doing business with CDOT through the Central Front Range Transportation Planning Region for your long range planning. So geography is important. So if you're looking to do something and it's within that urbanized area, you go through the MPO process. If it's outside of that MPO area, you're in the CDOT TPR process. So that's sort of the geography. Now we'll sort of get into the process, which I think is kind of what Laura wanted me to talk about. So we are required every 5 years in attainment, every 4 years in non-attainment, to do a long range transportation plan for the urbanized area as the MPO. That plan, again, needs to be fiscally constrained, which means you can't have a whole bunch of projects in the plan that you'll never have money to do. And just as a quick aside, basically, I think it was Atlanta, the Fed said, hey, you guys have bad air quality. How are you going to fix the air quality? And they said, we're going to do all these great projects. So they put all these great projects in their long range plan. Well, 5 years later, their air quality is even worse, and they've never done any of those projects. And they're like, wait, how come you haven't done any of those projects? Oh, well, we just haven't got to them. And since we're allowed to put as many projects as we want in the plan, they're just there. And the Fed said, oh, okay, all right, smart guy. You want to monkey with the rules? We'll teach you. So the Feds came back and said everything has to be fiscally constrained, which means you have to actually have the funds available to do the projects you put in your long range plan. So you can't sort of have a whole bunch of feel good projects in there that you A, can't afford to do, or B, never have any intention of doing. You have a set amount of money that is anticipated within the region. And so therefore your projects need to fit within that fiscally constrained bucket, if you will. So it's a more realistic look at the projects and programs you plan on doing. So back to the long range plan. Again, it needs to be 20 years in length for horizon. Now, if you adopt a plan and then things sort of, the very next year, you're at 19 years, you don't have to do a new one. It's at the time of adoption, you're at 20 years. However, if you adopt a plan and you go to 19 years and then you want to amend your plan because something has happened, you cannot amend a non-conforming plan, i.e. if it's 19 years instead of 20, you can't just amend that plan. You have to do a whole new one, which again is why we do a 25-year horizon, sometimes even 30-year horizon, to make sure it's got some shelf life just in case something happens that we didn't anticipate. The other thing about the long range plan is that it has to be redone every 4 years if you're in non-attainment, every 5 years if you're in attainment. And as Andy had mentioned, I think it's pretty well explained, but just in case, attainment means that you are meeting the air quality standard, the federal air standards. Non-attainment means that you are not. So I talk kind of fast and I cover lots of things. So I'm now going to move into sort of the long range planning process, what it sort of looks like, what we do. But let me take a breath and give anybody an opportunity to ask any question because I went over something too quickly. And we're good. So I'm going to move on. So again, Laura wanted me to sort of chat about our upcoming long-range planning process. So we here at PPACG, we sort of try to break it down into a couple of different things. First off, we will put together a citizens advisory committee to look at the different projects and the funding assumptions and things like that. So one of our first things we'll do is we will put together the citizens committee. And because I have a little bit of a bizarre sense of humor, I was thinking we would call it the Regional Transportation Advisory Committee. And basically the acronym would be RAT PAC. So I get to be Joey Bishop. After we sort of put together that, we also want to make sure that we're good with the Title VI, which is the non-discriminatory practices, as well as how we're going to have the public participate. So one of the first sort of things we'll put together, and Mark Northrup is working on that now, is a public participation plan. So that way everybody knows how to access the process and how to get their ideas into the long-range plan consideration. After that's done, then we start doing what we like to call the sub plans. Think of the long-range plan as being the umbrella plan, and under that is a whole bunch of corridor or modal plans that we do that then feed up into it. Because, for example, if we do a freight plan, we could identify a roadway in the freight plan that says, hey, this particular roadway needs to be funded, but there's no funding actually associated with it. So what that freight plan will do is we'll talk about priorities, but then those priorities from that freight plan will then move up into the long range plan and be identified. It's the long range plan that sort of has those overall regional priorities of what the region's going to do in transportation projects and programs over the next 20 to 25 years. And from that long range plan list is where we actually grab projects for our transportation improvement program, which is sort of like a regional federal capitalized program. And it actually identifies the projects that the region will do and provides funding for those projects over the next 4 years. So there's a tip that is actually provides the funding, but the long range plan makes you eligible for the funding. And these sort of smaller corridor studies and modal studies identify the priorities to move up into the umbrella. So I'm going to pause again because that's sort of an important concept, because now I think I'm going to go from talking about in general these plans into the specialized human services transit plan. So before I do that, does everyone sort of get the big umbrella thing? And then I'm going to move to the specialized human services transit plan.
Hey, John, can you just, you mentioned the transit plan goes up into the LRTP, but what other plans besides the specialized transit plan that have to do with different modes of transportation are included in that?
Right. There is no federal requirement for anything to specifically be put into the plan other than the human services transit plan. Transit you need to have, that's a non-starter, but everything else is sort of optional based on what your region looks like. So we plan here at PPACG to have a freight plan, which we think we're going to start late next year. We have the TriCounty Study, which is finishing up now. And again, since that's a bigger geography, things within the MPO will move into that. Things outside the MPO will move into that TPR process that I mentioned earlier. We also plan on having a active transportation plan. Couldn't remember the words because they changed it. Back in my day, because I'm kind of old, it used to be, we used to call it pedestrian plan and a bike plan, those sorts of things. But nowadays, it's the term of art is active transportation. So we'll put together an active transportation plan, I believe, early into next year. So those are the things that we're planning on working on. So freight, bike ped under the active. And then we're also working with MMT to do an overall transit plan, as well as the specialized human services plan. Before I leave that answer, Danelle, hate to put you on the spot, but am I forgetting anything?
I don't think so. I think you
Okay.
covered everything.
So Laura, those are the ones. So if there's no other questions, now I'll sort of talk about, because I think it's very germane, and some of the other Jackson brothers, to what you're talking about of that specialized human services plan. So last time we did a human services transit plan was, I want to say 3 years ago, and we had Steer was the sub-consultant and HDR was the overall transit consultant. And it was a very rushed effort. I think we did it all within 6 months. And I think one of the main comments we received was, this was nice, but it was rushed. And a lot of the conversations didn't have time to sort of fully flesh out. So one of the things that we're planning for the next one is more of a timeline. I think we'll probably set aside like a full year for this effort, something like that, 9 months to a year. I don't have the schedule in front of me. And what that will do is the transit plan looks at the existing transit opportunities and will identify gaps and needs. And the main thing with transit is always, you've sort of got to find a balance between coverage and headways, because unless you have unlimited funds, which we don't, we all know that, right? The more coverage you provide and the more spread out you become, the longer the headways become and the service becomes less desirable. So you try to find that sort of sweet spot of where can we impact the most people, provide the most coverage for the most people, while at the same time doing it in such a way where the headways are reasonable and people can feel like, yeah, I'm not going to be sitting in the sun or in the snow for an hour waiting for a bus. A part of that plan is that specialized human services transit plan, which looks at the others, the services that are provided for folks who do not normally take the bus and are not eligible for the complimentary paratransit service. I think I actually said that correctly. So the last effort we did, I know Dave and Jolene, you guys were around for that. And I forgive me if I don't recognize some of the other names on this list here. Maybe Diana, you were involved if I remember correctly. But that will be coming up here in the next year. So I'm going to take a pause because I have a feeling this might be something where either A, people want to comment on the last effort, or B, speak about sort of how we can improve upon the next effort. Because even though we're partnering with MMT, Laura's going to be our point person here at PPACG. So this might be a good opportunity to sort of let Laura and me know what's on your mind and make sure that we have something teed up for when we start moving into the process. So pause for any questions or comments. All right, I must have lost the audience. Is this thing on? Come on, someone's got to have a question or a comment or something.
I just want to thank everybody who participated in kind of helping put together the scope of work. That was just one of the many efforts that we're going to try to continue to engage you guys in the process and make for sure this plan not only like works with other plans, but also works for you guys and your funding needs and
Mhm.
ideas around challenges that we need to work on in the next several years. So
Well, I find this really helpful just because with the number of studies that you're undertaking, it gets honestly to the point where we feel like some of it is potentially redundant. So to get a little bit of an overview is helpful. I can distinguish between a human services plan, an active transportation plan, and understand how those feed into a long range plan and feed up into the tip. I'm still a little bit hazy on the Tri-County Study and where that fits in and where that is non-redundant with some of these other plans.
So the Tri-County Study was a product of the very first Board of Directors retreat that we had. Oh, I want to say, what is it, almost 3 years now, right? So they basically said, hey, one of the issues that we've had over the years here at PPACG is, remember that geography that I talked about. There's the MPO, which is sort of the donut, the donut hole in the donut in the middle of the Tri-County area. And then you've got the rest of it all sitting within Central Front Range. And I think the Central Front Range members kind of felt like, you know, we are not looking at transportation holistically. I think I used that word correctly. And you basically are just sort of only focusing on that urbanized area. So what can we do about that? And so the Tri-County Study was like, hey, look, let's go ahead and look at all three counties, Park, Teller, and El Paso, in a holistic fashion, and sort of see beyond that state level, right? The CDOT does a great job of planning the state sort of network through the 3-county region. But below that, how do we make sure that we have good connections? How do we make sure that some of the policies for maintenance and operations make sense? How do we make sure that some of the transit and other multimodal opportunities sort of get fleshed out? So the brainchild was this Tri-County Study. The next problem was, how do we fund a Tri-County Study? Because not only was the thinking very siloed, so was the funding. So you could use MPO funding within the MPO, and you could use the other state funding outside, but you really sort of couldn't swap. We had an opportunity with the new Multimodal Options Fund. This was the first version of it, as well as some other transportation alternative dollars to sort of put together a funding cocktail. And a great job by Wendy Pettit at CDOT to sort of, this was her genius brain stroke to sort of figure this all out. But Wendy figured out sort of how we could get this funded. Now, it took about a year to get all the IGAs and everything in place. But then we got the thing funded, and we were actually able to kick it off. So, but by the nature of the funding and everything else, this is where I'm actually answering your question, Dave, was we had to sort of be all things to all people. So the things outside the MPO, really, that's not redundant, because it's really the first time that we've talked about that within that TPR area, and have those folks have that opportunity to sort of talk to things. So not redundant there. And I think a lot of the rural jurisdictions within PPACG sort of appreciate this and are looking forward to the opportunity to have a document in the end that will allow them to identify and seek funding for projects they need. So we've got that part. But again, like I said, because of the funding, we had to be all things to all people, and there had to be something for that MPO in there. The MPO in there, this is where it is a little redundant, right? Because as we were talking to the MPO folks who also have a long range plan, who also have a lot of these other plans, right? We couldn't say, hey, tell us what you want, but you can't copy anything you've ever said before. That just wouldn't work. So to some extent, the Tri-County Study is a little redundant. However, it allows us to sort of open up and provide a little more detail on some of these things, and hopefully why some of the concepts might be slightly redundant. Some of the action items are unique and specific that will allow for, after the study is done, that it just doesn't sit on a shelf. They can grab some of those recommendations from the Tri-County study and move forward with it. I know one of the things that I've heard so far, I don't know if it'll make it into the final, is sort of the idea of an eastern loop, right? That's still in the urbanized area, that sort of acts as a reliever or redundancy. Look, I'm using the word redundancy again, but resiliency, right? Redundant and resilient alternative to I-25 is this eastern loop, right? That's been said before, but this particular study could open the door to open up a more very specialized study on that particular concept. So again, hopefully that helps a little bit. Does it, or did I just muddy the waters, Dave?
No, that helped a lot. Thank you.
Okay. Any other? All right, well, I'm going to sort of hop back so that after talking to the overall studies, now we'll hop back up to this umbrella thing of the long range plan. So at this point, I'm almost finished. We've got all of our sub studies and our corridor studies and things like that. We've got our public involvement plan. We've got our citizens advisory committee or our technical advisory committee, our RAT PAC. So then what they do is they sort of reaffirm the overall vision and goals and performance measures for the plan, right? So we don't want to develop a plan that the public doesn't want, right? So, years ago we would say, well, everybody cares about mobility. And then years later, things change and we went, well, we care about mobility still, but we also care about sustainability. And then a few years later, we come back and we say, well, we want resilience, right? So it's not up to us to identify the vision and the goals for the region. That's up to the folks in general. And we want to be receptive and understanding to the goals that are set by the community. And so we can't assume that we have the same goals and the same vision as a community that we did 4 or 5 years ago. So we need to reaffirm that. So we have that vision and goals and performance measures sort of discussion. And they could very well say, nope, we're good. We have the same vision as last time. Or they could say, hey, we want to tweak the vision and we want to add more stuff like this. And the way we add more stuff like this, let's just say safety, is we want, under your performance measures, we want you to give more points and more priority to projects that improve safety. So that happens again sort of early in the process. And then moving forward, after we've got our vision, our goals, our performance measures, we do a financial plan, which is basically where I sort of look at all of the tea leaves and I say, here's how much I think we're going to have available in funding in the future. Sometimes actually it's me reading the tea leaves, which was the last time, but when we did an amendment, we took the CDOT financial plan and we just used that. So either I'll read the tea leaves or we'll grab the CDOT reading of the tea leaves, but we'll bring a financial plan. And again, the board and the community group will look at that and say, yeah, we think that's a reasonable expectation of funding, or no, it's not. And we will adjust the funding or program accordingly. So once we sort of have our vision, our goals, our available money, then we look at the universe of all of the projects, as well as all of our challenges. So we'll sort of model the whole region and say, here's our current congestion hotspots. And then looking into the year 2050, here's where we think we'll have more congestion hotspots. So here's our challenges. And then we develop from the universe of all possible projects, the projects and programs to address that. And if you notice, I've been very careful to not only say projects, but programs, because sometimes there is a bias to say projects all the time. Sometimes the best solution is not necessarily building something from point A to point B, but sometimes it's putting in a program that allows for transit to be run, or some other sort of policy implication that can address that issue. not necessarily trying to build your way out of congestion. So we always want to sort of think that way. So then we take the whole universe of projects. To be clear, PPACG does not suggest projects. We don't force jurisdictions to bring projects. So if there's a roadway that everybody loves, but a jurisdiction doesn't want to build it, we can't force that jurisdiction to build it and bring it into the process. So jurisdictions bring their own projects into the process. We sort of take the available money versus the challenges versus the projects and programs, and we mix them all up and we come out with a fiscally constrained list of proposed projects. That list of proposed projects goes through a public involvement process. And after that public involvement process, then if we need to make any changes, we do. We go through a final sort of check, a 30-day public comment period. And Viola at the end comes an adopted long-range plan, then rinse and repeat and do it again in another few years. One thing I will mention, because Andy brought it up, is this long-range plan will have a lot of greenhouse gas calculations that have to be done because of SB 260. So it is possible that even though the public might say they want a certain mix of projects, it might not be feasible under the SB 260 state rules. And we might need to go back and change our project mix to be compliant with those rules. Either way, ultimately the public will have some say into what the final project is because the adoption comes from our board of directors and they listen to the public input. But regardless, the state rule will definitely take some options off the table. So with that, I think I've answered what Laura's assignment that given to me. And if not, Laura, tell me, and I will go back and do stuff. But otherwise, let's open it up to questions. Is this thing on? Hello?
John, I think you bring up a really good point when it comes to the greenhouse gas. Even where I am within VITA, we're taking a look at the state's ambitious goals toward reducing emissions and encouraging transit. The number of vehicles in that ZEV plan, Project ZEV or whatever it's called, the number of vehicles that they want to see transitioned over to electric by the year 2050. And saying, okay, what role, what obligation do we as an agency play? And I think we all have to do that and start to determine what role we play in achieving that. And then when you say, well, that's statewide, but then you start saying, well, where are the major population areas? Who does this really impact? And it's really up and down the Front Range. If we don't help achieve that goal, the rest of the state is not going to be able to have the numbers to fall behind it and achieve those goals. So we've got to really take that seriously as a community to achieve that.
Yeah, I believe by 2050, their assumption is that there's 90% electric vehicle penetration. And you're absolutely right that, given that Colorado Springs and Denver and basically the Front Range is what 85% of the overall population of the state.
Exactly.
Something like that. Yeah, it can't happen unless we do what we can for electrification. There's a couple of issues under electrification. Obviously, nobody wants to see any sort of mandates there. However, we do think what we can do is for the people who want to electrify, how do we make it as easy as possible for them to do that? So there are 3, I believe, enterprises within the state to handle electrification. One's run through CDPHE, one's run through CDOT, and the other one, I believe, is DOLA, but don't quote me on that. I can't remember. And Danielle, this is where your expertise is welcome. Feel free to jump in and correct me or just take over. So of those 3, one does the electrification of sort of school buses and I think other public fleets. So obviously that is an opportunity. One is for commercial electrification and helping the commercial fleet to just sort of switch over. And then I think the third is for charging stations. And that was run through CDOT. And that's where we can interact quite strongly, because some of the reasons people don't move to electrification is they're afraid they're going to run out of a charge and be stranded. So by having more charging opportunities, more charging stations, we can reduce that anxiety and provide a positive incentive for people to go the electric route. And again, I think that works more in line with the overall philosophy of this region. Is if someone wants to do the right thing, we're going to give them the tools to do it. But we are certainly not going to make a unilateral decision on quote unquote what the right thing is and then force people to do it. That tends to get people's dander up. And when the state goes by the we're going to provide positive opportunities for people to do the right thing, I think there's lots of room for us to work together. When they go to the mandates, that's when it becomes a lot more difficult. So I think that's my response there, but I'll open it up for Andy or Danelle to add anything I may have missed.
Just for clarification, the Clean Transit Enterprise is the one run by CDOT. And I believe that is 134 million, it looks like, from SB 21260.
Thank you.
Also, I know Danelle is working with Casey Fortman, who is also a GIS planner for PPACG on a electrification plan, so the EV plan. I believe they're going to reach out to kind of some of you guys to talk through that planning effort. They're in the mapping stage, I think, at this point. So for the MMTs of the world, they actually are required through FTA. I can't remember by a certain date, and I know that they've already started and almost finished their plan, but it's a low-no emissions plan, which is a requirement now, and it's also a requirement that's really being pushed with the IIJA, the Ouija board, as John says, the infrastructure bill. So luckily that has not been passed down to smaller programs, but it is something in the future that I know that they may do a statewide initiative with the smaller programs to be a part of. But yeah, I thanks, John, so much for kind of explaining that, and thank you, Andy, for giving us a high level overview of where we may be able to play in as a transit group into some of these efforts to increase our air quality, but also just increase our services to the area.
Sure, pleasure. Thanks for having us. And we're happy to come back whenever and talk more about how to get the MCC more engaged in some of the work we're doing. I think, given the GHG rules that are in place and other requirements, there's going to be more of an emphasis on mitigation related non-highway capacity projects. Again, it's going to really be determined by our jurisdictions and projects they bring forward in the long range plan. But I think the rules have shifted a bit, obviously, which is fine. And I think that's going to really impact our project mix going forward. So yeah, much more to come. And we'd love to see how we can get you guys engaged in that effort.
Thank you both so much. Really appreciate it. Okay, with that, I realized I just got a note here that we're still at number 5 on the agenda. We have a couple of community guests on the call that I want to go back and recognize if they are still on the call. And I would encourage them to take themselves off mute and introduce themselves. I believe we have an Andrew Smith from Good Wheels on the call. Andrew, could you introduce yourself?
Hi, everybody. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi, yes. So I run the Good Wheels program at Goodwill of Colorado. We specialize in taking our clients to and from doctor's appointments. Majority of our clientele are Medicaid, but we do, accept private pay and, take anybody anywhere.
Thank you, Andrew. Appreciate you introducing yourself. We also have William of Second Home on the call. William?
Hi, and it's a pleasure that you guys invited me to this. Yeah, I'm William. I'm the transportation director from Second Home. Pretty much we take the elderly and disabled to their medical appointments. And yeah, we use Medicaid as well. So
Okay.
be here.
And then finally,
Sorry, that was my fault.
finally, I want to recognize that we have Paul Spott on the call from Independence Center. Paul, could you introduce yourself?
Yes, my name's Paul. I work with the Independence Center, and it's nice to be here and be a part of this, and hopefully we get some of this taken care of.
Okay.
William, do you mind dropping your email in the chat so that I can make for sure you get the updates for the meeting?
Yes, I would do that.
Mm-hmm. And if any of you in the future would like to be the official rep for your organization, please let us know. One of the things we're going to do here next is to take a look at our membership, and we're going to confirm some new appointments and take a look at our roster. Those are a couple of things coming up on the agenda. Last meeting, we actually, I think I was voted in as chair, but we're confirming my new appointment. And then we have a new appointment for Teller County Senior Coalition and Independence Center. So we're confirming those appointments. Melissa, do I need to have a motion for that?
We
or-
don't.
we don't?
And also the other one is Chelsea with the Downtown Partnership.
Super.
And then Diana is actually Diana Van Auken. She's been a member. And we are putting her as the primary contact for Teller County Senior Coalition
Okay.
instead of the alternate. So Kathy Lowry is going to become alternate. Diana is
The
primary.
Okay.
Chelsea will be with the Downtown Partnership, is a new organization joining the MCC. We're glad to have the Downtown Partnership come on board. And with Chelsea, the Independence Center has had representation in the past, but we've had a gap for about 2 years. And so
Okay.
we're welcoming Deanna, which is great.
Mhm.
And Paul is on from the Independence Center as well, but we're hoping that maybe Paul will become a citizen at large, still working
Mhm.
on that.
Okay.
And so some really good new faces on the Mobility Coordinating Committee. And of course, grateful, Dave, that Invita has put you on and that
Sure.
you are our acting chair. So thank
And
you.
I want to recognize our new vice chair as well, which is Kristen from Goodwill. So thank you, Kristen, for stepping up as well. I appreciate it. I think when the agenda was posted along with it was a full roster of the members. And so if anyone has any questions on who the members are of the MCC, it's quite an extensive list now, which is really exciting to see as well.
And again, I'll be updating this with the people that we mentioned today
Sure.
and sending it out again. So
Okay.
what I'm a little concerned about, and we can talk about this at the executive committee with the chair and vice chair and second vice chair, is that we do have some organizations that have not had members on board for a while. And so we may need to go back and revisit that, but we can do that at our executive committee meeting.
All right. Well, we can help engage them. All right. So up next on our agenda is training, information sharing, coordination opportunities. I don't have anything on my list to talk about there. Melissa, did you have something?
I think that may be me. Oh, yes. Okay. This is actually you, Dave. This was the
Okay.
list. So I'll tee it up and then kick it to you.
Sure.
So the executive committee of the MCC is meeting actually a week after each one of these meetings to kind of put together our agenda for the following meeting. But we did some just brainstorming about what maybe good topics for us to talk about and to tackle. Andy mentioned several things today when it came to the new regulations that are coming through about air quality and how transit is going to be something that's going to be a focus in order for us to meet those attainment numbers. So these are different things that were tossed around, and Dave, I'll kick it to you to kind of go through the list.
Sure. There's nothing here in priority order. Let me at least start with that. This was kind of the idea generation. We're throwing it out to all of you to review the items on the list and think about what additional items you might want to see addressed in an upcoming MCC meeting. These are some of the hot topics that we thought about in terms of whether it be multimodal, ADA. As you can see, the first one on the list we took care of today. We brought Andy Gunning, which was great. And John, I appreciate your participation as well. But then we also want to get into veteran transportation. What's going on in the community around veteran transportation? We want to make sure we leave time for member presentations. Hear from the Transportation Advisory Committee. Local and state transportation priorities from City Council or El Paso County or CDOT. We might invite reps from some of these agencies or groups to speak briefly as guests with the MCC so that we get their perspective. Upcoming local and state transit plans, that might come up again throughout the year just because of the progress that we'll make maybe 6 months in. It might be a quarterly brief update. We'll see what's needed for that. Andy mentioned first mile, last mile. And so we might want to come back and revisit that specifically. Anne Brzezinski from CASTA might be a great guest speaker to our MCC with her state level view of different issues that are going on around the state. We want to make sure that as we as agencies, our own, representing our own agencies and understanding where the state and feds are going with greenhouse gases and zero emissions, how are we working in concert with Colorado Springs Utilities? Where are they with setting up charging stations around the community so that if we adopt new policies or procedures for organizations, we know that we've got the support in the community to accomplish our work. And then finally, traffic reduction, congestion, which Andy also mentioned. So these are just some great topics. Please send us, either put it in the chat or get to one of us offline, whether Melissa, Laura, myself, or Kristen, and let us know what additional ideas you think would be worthy of discussion as an MCC. And what we'll do is build out some of these agendas in advance. And then depending on where things are going in the community, we'll kind of shuffle them around and figure out what's up next. So that's what I had on that. Anybody have anything to add? Melissa or Laura, anything you wanted to add on this?
Just a couple of topics. Well, one topic in particular that maybe Danelle, if you want to hop in to talk about, it's probably a little premature for that. So MMOF, so the multimodal funds, I don't know what they're calling them this year. It's still MMOF, but they've changed the wording up a little bit. The TAC actually met this past week to kind of talk about the selection process and the NOFA for the new MMOF funds that are coming through Senate Bill 260. Most of the funds that have been identified for this region are going to be federal funds this first year. But more to come on that. The MPO actually manages the process, the selection process of those projects for the MPO region. There is MMOF funds that are available that will be coming through the TPR regions. So anywhere outside of the MPO in our 3-county area, you would be going through the TPR NOFA process. So I know that the TAC is going to have kind of a special meeting to talk about sort of what that selection process looks like, the timeline for that selection process, which is going to impact you guys who have applied for those funds in the past, but also want to key it up as an opportunity for those that haven't applied for those. Senate Bill 260 actually has funded MMOF for the next 10 years, which is super cool. It was sort of a pilot program last year, but it was seen as a major need for specifically just projects that don't really fall within our federal and state funds that we typically get. And so, yeah, more to come on that. I know Danelle's kind of managing the process with the TAC of getting it, the selection process sort of outlined for the region. So, yep. So
Yes.
MMOF may be a topic that we will discuss in MCC. Yes.
That sounds great. Let's add it to our list.
Danelle, did you have anything to add on that?
No, I think you did a great job. We're setting up a workshop for the TAC to define, as you said, the scoring criteria and the application timeline and process. So we'll pass along more information as that becomes available.
And this year, DTR, and we're going to hold them to it, DTR, the transit folks from CDOT is going to be involved in the earlier stage of the selection process for us, just to make for sure screening projects and making for sure that there's no issues with projects after they're selected. Dave is laughing.
Yeah, only because we got stuck in the middle of that last time.
Yeah, so we're trying to make for sure that we involve them earlier on, and just as a review of projects that are being put before us. So
super. Appreciate your participation. All right. With that, action items for the next MCC meeting. I know mine will be that within the next couple of weeks to get any of your additional ideas for this list, so that when we have as an executive committee, as we get together to meet before the next MCC meeting, we're going to nail down some agendas. So
there is one thing that we forgot to do, and this is just Robert's rules. We actually didn't approve the minutes today. So
we did.
Oh.
I combined the agenda and minutes as one approval.
Well, you rock. I missed that. So
we got that one. Anything else for the good of the group today? All right. Well, with that, I have a motion to adjourn.
I motion to adjourn the meeting, Kristen Amundson.
Thank you, Kristen. Do we have a second? If not, we'll keep meeting.
I second.
All right.
Okay.
All right. Thank you. All in favor? And it's a wrap. Thank you all.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone. Good job, Dave, on your first meeting.
Thanks.